Hi, I'm making this video to cover a big scientific misconception that's prevalent among our public, and that misconception is whether or not we are related to apes. Most of us have been taught to consider ourselves as advanced apes. However, is that what is true? Well, let's look at what the DNA says. When Darwin proposed that we came from a common ancestor with apes, he had no idea that DNA even existed. He theorized that traits were passed on by the reassembly of minuscule body parts that combined in the mother animal and grew into a new creature. Of course, he was wrong. Darwin's suppositions published in The Origin of Species were mostly based on keen observation and comparison, and the reason that he supposed that humans and apes were related is because humans and apes sometimes act and look similar, to the great apes anyway, but looks can be deceiving. The discovery of DNA enters the picture after Watson and Crick deduced a double helix structure from a cryptic X-ray photograph taken by Rosalind Franklin. She was using X-ray crystallography, which is a science we don't use as much anymore. Well, what she took was a photo 51, and it was an X like this. And one side of the X was a little bit bolder than the other side, and that let them know that it was actually two things crisscrossing one in front of another. And that's how Watson and Crick deduced that the DNA molecule was a double helix. However, they know this molecule is in all living things, not in a rock. They still don't know what it does yet. All they did was diagnose the structure. A few years later, though, we discovered that certain patterns of DNA are shared by all members of a species with certain traits. DNA codes for traits. DNA must be the molecule of inheritance. Very exciting. When scientists begin to compare DNA patterns across species, they discover that humans have a 98% similar DNA sequence to chimpanzees and bonobos. They also have 96% similar DNA to gorillas, and on down the chimp ape line, less and less similar. However, they also discovered that there are backward running sequences between the two groups, human and ape. But because they don't know what that means yet, they assume that Darwin was right and that humans and apes did in fact have a common ancestor. But was he right? As we study DNA more, scientists realize that a reverse gene really means something else, and its implications for inheritance are changed. However, this information is swept under the rug. The general public never knows it. They continue to be taught that we are relatives of primates because on the surface we are 98% similar. Why? Because by this time scientists discovered that reversed sequences of DNA, well, by the time they discover it means there's no common ancestor. Evolutionary theory has already taken a firm hold in our society. It's now part of our collective belief system. How dare anyone speak against our commonly held modern knowledge? Okay, I'm going to tell you what the DNA actually says. But first I have to explain to you what a reversed gene is. Okay, this is what a reverse gene is. Let's pretend ABCD is human and DCBA is chimp. They both have start and stop codons. Here's a start codon. I put a semicolon forward. Start codon is both on the same side. Stop codon is on the other side. I used a colon. What this does is it creates a reversed shaped protein. Right, like right-handed to left-handed. They were reversed shapes, but they are identical other than that. And just for another example, made a couple of other things. These look like jewelry, they're metal. Most of the time when proteins get made by cellular machinery, they come off as a string. And that string either folds back and forth in pleats, or it becomes a spiral. Now let's pretend we have a DNA gene in humans and a gene in apes, and their shapes are nearly identical except that they are reversed. One spirals one way, one spirals the other way. They're both meant to fit into something similar. But this one can only fit into an opening that goes like this. This one won't. If we put this protein into the cell that requires a different fitting, it's just not going to be functional, or it could even be poisonous to the cell. And if we turn it around, we've got a blunt end. So it's not compatible. Okay, so some of you may be thinking, why does it matter that it's not compatible? It could still have evolved, right? Not exactly. Because in order to have one reverse gene, you have to have another reverse gene that it fits into. And you get whole sequences of genes like this. For example, reversed DNA makes apes able to digest Splenda, and we can't. All of our carbohydrates in our cells are right-handed carbohydrates, not in apes. Nearly all of our proteins are left-handed, not in apes. If you put the wrong protein in a different cell, you'll poison that cell to death. That cell will not function. It'll actually gum up the machinery in the cell and kill the cell by default. So if it's poisonous, how could it have evolved gradually? It can't. You'd end up with a lot of dead animals, and that's it. You wouldn't have a benign gene happening.